I want you to start by picturing something for a second.
Okay, what are we picturing?
Imagine a perfectly clean slate, like a revolution that actually works exactly the way it's supposed to.
Right, the ultimate dream.
Yeah, exactly. You have this group of subjects who have been, oppressed, overworked, underfed for their entire existence. And finally, they just snap.
They cast off their chains.
Exactly. They throw out the tyrant who has been making their lives absolutely miserable, and they sit down in the rubble to build a new world.
Right, and they write up a flawless set of
A
rules.
perfectly fair society. And they look at each other and swear with this absolute burning sincerity that they will never, ever become like the old masters they just kicked out.
It's the utopian dream.
Yeah.
I mean, it is the moment where all the bad history is ostensibly erased. And everything from here on out is going to be driven by pure equality and justice.
It's an incredibly powerful image.
It really is. And it's one that has driven human history for centuries, right? From massive political revolutions to, honestly, the founding of new companies.
But the question we have to grapple with today for this deep dive is, how long does it take for that perfect dream to start rotting?
That's the real question.
And more importantly, how exactly does it happen? Because the terrifying truth of human history and, well, organizational psychology is that it rarely takes very long for the new bosses to start looking exactly like the old bosses.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that is a pattern we see over and over.
So welcome to this deep dive into George Orwell's Animal Farm, and we are not treating this source text just as a classic story about talking farm animals today.
No, absolutely not.
We are pulling it apart to see the wiring underneath.
Because we are treating it as what it truly is, right?
Yeah.
A terrifyingly accurate blueprint of political decay.
Totally.
I mean, this text is a masterclass in understanding how elite capture works and how language itself can be manipulated to control reality.
It's wild how relevant it still is.
Oh, absolutely. We are going to deconstruct how a utopian dream rots from the inside out, tracking the specific step-by-step mechanics of betrayal. Because power doesn't just corrupt people behind closed doors.
Right.
It actively rewrites the reality that everyone else is living in.
So while we are looking at a framework built around pigs and horses and a literal farm today, I want you, the listener, to keep your own world in mind.
Yeah, that's crucial.
The mechanics of manipulation we are breaking down, gaslighting, shifting the rules in the middle of the game, weaponized fear, they're highly relevant to navigating any power structure you exist in today.
Everywhere from governments to the office.
Exactly. Whether you are trying to decode the spin from a corporate PR department, or surviving a toxic workplace environment, or just trying to make sense of the daily news cycle.
The animals might be archetypes,
Yeah.
but the playbook is entirely real.
It really is. So to understand how the dream dies, we first have to understand why the dream was so appealing in the first place, right?
Yeah, we have to look closely at the foundational vision that sets the whole mechanism in motion.
And that vision begins with the archetype of the visionary founder. In this blueprint, that is Old Major.
Right, the prize boar.
Yeah, the boar who gathers everyone together to diagnose their problem. And he doesn't offer, like, vague platitudes. He points to a fundamental economic reality.
He says, man is the only creature that consumes without producing.
Right. He points out that the oppressor doesn't give milk, doesn't lay eggs, can't pull a plow.
Yet the oppressor is the lord of all the workers.
Exactly. The oppressor takes everything produced, returns the bare minimum required for survival, and just hoards the rest.
It is a devastatingly effective diagnosis because it cuts through all the noise. It identifies the core structural inequality perfectly.
So simple.
And the solution offered is brilliantly simple too. Remove the non-producing management class from the equation, and the root cause of hunger and overwork is abolished forever.
The workers will keep the fruits of their labor. It is so incredibly seductive because it is completely binary. The rhetoric is just absolute. The old system is entirely evil, and the proposed new system is entirely good.
All men are enemies. All animals are comrades.
Right. And the visionary doesn't just leave it at philosophy. He lays down specific, hard and fast rules to prevent the newly liberated workers from ever becoming like their former oppressors.
Which is fascinating when you look at what those specific rules are.
Yeah, I mean, no living in houses, no sleeping in beds, no wearing clothes, no drinking alcohol, no touching money, no engaging in trade.
And above all, no one must ever tyrannize over their own kind.
Right, and if you look closely at those rules, they aren't just arbitrary lifestyle choices.
No, not at all. They are structural barriers against elite capture. The visionary understands that the trappings of power beds, houses, money, trade, Those are the very mechanisms that create distinct social classes.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Think about it. A house physically separates the ruler from the ruled. Clothes visually separate them. Money creates economic disparity.
So the goal here is to build an absolute firewall against human vices.
Exactly. Because there is a profound understanding that if the liberated adopt the tools of the oppressor, they will inevitably become the oppressors themselves.
I look at that set of rules, that manifesto, and I instantly think about a tech startup's founding culture.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
You know exactly that. Right.
Oh, yeah. The garage days.
Yeah. They come out of the gate with this pure disruptive idealism. They have flat hierarchies. Everyone is going to sit at open desks. There are no corner offices.
The CEO wears a hoodie just like the interns.
Exactly. And their entire stated mission is to, quote, make the world a better place by overthrowing the legacy corporate dinosaurs.
Right.
It's that exact same binary clarity. The legacy corporations are corrupt, bureaucratic, and evil. Our new disruptive startup is pure, egalitarian, and good.
That analogy holds up perfectly. Because the Startup Manifesto relies on defining itself entirely in opposition to the old regime. It creates cohesion through a shared enemy.
Right, but there is a fatal flaw built into this kind of binary idealism right from the very start, isn't there?
There is a huge one.
I would argue the flaw is the assumption that cruelty, greed, and exploitation are uniquely traits of the enemy.
Yes, that's it, exactly.
By externalizing all evil onto a single scapegoat, the previous management or the legacy corporations, the visionary leaves the new society completely unprepared for the reality of internal corruption.
It's a massive blind spot.
It feels incredibly naive to assume that if you just remove the specific people currently in charge, the new people who step up will naturally live in perfect, harmonious brotherhood.
It is the tragic blind spot of almost every utopian movement in history.
Wow, yeah.
When you believe that only the quote-unquote other can be bad, you stop watching your own actions. And you certainly stop critically evaluating the actions of your peers.
Right, because you're all the good guys.
Exactly. The initial diagnosis of the current system of repression is completely accurate, but it totally fails to recognize that power itself is the corrupting force. It operates independently of who is wielding it.
So the moment the old leadership is ousted, a massive, dangerous vacuum is created. The old power structure is gone, the oppressor is chased off the property, and suddenly, well, someone has to figure out how to run the day-to-day operations.
Right. The philosophy didn't account for administrative reality.
Nature abhors a vacuum, and political systems absolutely despise them.
They do. In the immediate aftermath of a successful restructuring, the actual work still has to be done. The metaphorical hay still has to be harvested.
And we see very quickly who steps into that void. It is the faction that has already accumulated the necessary skills to govern.
In this blueprint, it's the pigs, who had quietly taught themselves to read and write before the revolution even happened.
Which is a huge advantage.
Massive. They are recognized as the cleverest, so they naturally assume leadership. But notice the immediate shift in their role. They do not actually work. They direct and supervise the others.
And that right there is the very first crack in the foundation of equality.
Yes, it is.
Within days of the restructuring, a division of labor materializes that completely separates the physical workers from the intellectual managers. And it seems completely logical at first, right?
Sure. The harvest is a huge success because of their organization.
But then comes the first real test of that foundational rule: all are equal. There is a surplus of high-quality resources, the milk from the cows and the windfall apples from the orchard.
And what do the workers assume?
The workers assume these premium resources will be shared out equally among everyone as promised.
But that's not what happens.
Instead, the order goes out that all the premium resources are to be brought to the management headquarters for the exclusive use of the leadership class.
And what's really telling here is that even the leaders who fiercely disagree on every other policy issue, the archetypes of the opposing political parties, Napoleon and Snowball, they are in full immediate agreement on this single issue.
Right. They hate each other, but they agree on the apples.
Because they have discovered their shared class interest. Preserving their own elite status overrides their ideological differences.
So when the workers start to murmur about this blatant inequality, the leadership doesn't send in the enforcers to crush them. Not yet, anyway.
Force is too expensive and risky at this early stage.
Instead, they send in the PR department. They send Squealer.
Ah, Squealer.
We have to unpack the archetype of Squealer because this is where the manipulation becomes an absolute art form. Squealer is the spin doctor, the brilliant talker who can skip from side to side, constantly moving, using physical charisma to disarm his audience.
He is described as being able to turn black into white.
He is the embodiment of institutional propaganda. His defense of the hoarding of resources is a masterpiece of psychological manipulation.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't stand up and say, hey, we have the power, so we are taking the premium food.
Right. That would highlight the reality of the situation and probably cause a revolt.
Exactly. Instead, he frames their immense privilege as a terrible, self-sacrificing burden.
The audacity of his argument is just staggering. He essentially tells the workers, you don't think we are doing this out of selfishness, do you? Most of us actually dislike these premium resources. We don't even want these delicious apples.
It is a brilliant inversion of reality. He claims they need these resources purely for their health.
Right.
And to justify this, he introduces a crucial, newly invented concept. He designates the leadership class as, quote-unquote, brain workers.
Brain workers. Wow.
He argues that the entire management of the enterprise depends entirely on them. And then he uses the ultimate modern shield. He claims it has been proved by science that these specific resources contain substances absolutely necessary to the biological well-being of a brain worker.
So he elevates their managerial role into something mystical and biological that requires special sustenance.
Yes.
This marks the literal birth of a new technocratic elite class. They are using their superior intellect and their literacy not to elevate the rest of the group, not to make everyone's life easier, but to manufacture justifications for their own special privileges.
This is the exact mechanism of elite capture.
The elite capture, let's dig into that.
Elite capture occurs when the managerial class successfully convinces the working class that the manager's extreme comfort is absolutely essential for the worker's basic survival.
Think about how companies justify massive executive compensation packages during a year of layoffs.
Oh, perfectly analogous.
The board will argue that they need a $20 million bonus to retain, quote, top talent, unquote, and that the CEO requires access to a private jet not because they enjoy luxury, but because their time is so incredibly valuable and they need to be perfectly optimized to keep the company from going under.
It's the exact same argument Squealer is making about the apples.
It totally is.
And if you look closely at Squealer's rhetorical strategy, he doesn't just rely on pseudoscience. He finishes his argument with the ultimate thought-terminating cliché.
What does he say?
He asks the workers, do you know what would happen if we failed in our duty? The old boss would come back.
Wow.
And he repeats it, hammering the fear home. Surely there is no one among you who wants to see the old boss come back.
That tactic instantly short-circuits the entire conversation.
Absolutely.
It's a massive existential threat dropped right in the middle of a debate about resource allocation. It completely shuts down any critical thinking the workers were trying to engage in.
Right, because they might be confused about why the managers need all the apples, but they are absolutely certain they don't want the old abusive system to return.
So, paralyzed by that fear, they just concede the argument.
And the psychological pivot here is the critical moment of failure for the utopian dream.
Why is it the critical moment?
Because once a populace accepts this first, seemingly small, logically flawed justification for inequality, the structural integrity of their reality is compromised. They have accepted the foundational premise that some individuals fundamentally need and deserve more than others based purely on their self-assigned role.
Man, and once you've convinced people that you deserve the apples because you are a brain worker, you're eventually going to decide you need the comfortable beds.
Oh, inevitably.
And the private offices.
Yeah.
And the luxury goods. Once the door is open, the leadership class realizes they can alter the very fabric of reality to suit their growing desires.
Which brings us to the slow, agonizing process of gaslighting and the weaponization of language.
This is where the blueprint reveals its most insidious mechanics.
Right, because the foundational rules, the commandments painted on the wall, were supposed to be unalterable law. They were the objective truth of the new society.
But as the leadership slowly adopts all the vices they originally swore to destroy, moving into the former oppressor's headquarters, sleeping in beds, consuming alcohol, those unalterable rules mysteriously begin to shift.
It is the slow boil of the frog. It never happens all at once.
Never.
Yeah.
The workers hear a rumor that the leadership is sleeping in beds. And a few of the older workers actually remember that there was a definite, explicit ruling against beds.
Right, so they go to the wall to check the objective truth.
They have someone read the commandment. But the commandment no longer says, no animal shall sleep in a bed. It now reads, no animal shall sleep in a bed with sheets.
With sheets. The linguistic manipulation here is incredibly precise. It requires careful study. The leadership does not erase the rule.
Because erasing the rule would be an admission that the rule existed and was broken.
Exactly. Instead, they amend the rule with a qualifying phrase.
It's pure, cynical legalism. And then the PR department swoops in to provide the gaslighting.
Squealer's right there.
Right. Squealer tells them, you didn't really think there was a rule against beds, did you? A bed is just a place to sleep. A pile of straw is technically a bed. The rule is specifically against sheets, which are a human invention. We removed the sheets, so we are following the rules perfectly.
They're exploiting semantic loopholes to violate the entire spirit of the law while loudly pretending to uphold the absolute letter of the law.
Which is maddening.
Because a bed without sheets is just a bed with blankets. The physical comfort, the elevation of status, the separation from the working class, it is all exactly the same. But by shifting the definition of the words, they force the workers to argue against a technicality rather than fighting the actual injustice.
I see this constantly in modern corporate environments.
Oh, all the time.
Think about your own experiences with shifting terms of service agreements or internal company policies. You sign up for a digital platform because their core marketing promise is, we will never sell your data.
Right. It is painted on their metaphorical barn wall.
Exactly. 2 years later, the platform is acquired, or the board demands higher revenue. You notice an advertisement that feels a little too specific. You go digging through the updated terms of service, and the rule now says, we will never sell your data to third-party vendors not approved by our subsidiary networks.
Exactly. The core promise has been entirely inverted, but the language is structured to make you feel like you misremembered the original agreement.
Yeah.
And this gaslighting works largely because authoritarian systems exploit the populace's poor memories and their lack of independent written records.
That's a huge factor.
Squealer constantly challenges the worker's reality by asking, are you certain that this is not something that you have dreamed? Have you any record of such a resolution? Is it written down anywhere?
And because the workers don't have their own archives and their literacy is limited, their reality becomes entirely dependent on what the leadership tells them the reality is today.
If you can't independently verify the past is whatever the people in power say it is.
Which is terrifying, and we see this escalation continue. When the leadership begins executing internal rivals, the workers vaguely remember a rule saying, no one shall kill any other. But when they check the wall, the rule has grown a new appendage without cause.
Without cause.
And when the leaders discover the old tyrant's liquor cabinet, the rule against alcohol becomes to excess.
The alterations are always just enough to retroactively legalize whatever the leadership has already decided to do.
Always.
But manipulating the rules is only one facet of how language is weaponized. The system also replaces objective, observable reality with confusing, impenetrable statistics.
Oh, this is one of the most frustrating and recognizable tactics. Later in the timeline of this decay, the enterprise is failing. The workers are literally starving, they are cold, they are overworked, and their daily rations are being drastically cut.
Their lived experience is one of intense suffering and decline.
But the leadership does not acknowledge this reality. Instead, Squealer emerges with long, complex sheets of paper. He reads out endless lists of figures, proving with absolute statistical certainty that the production of every single class of foodstuff has increased by 200%, 300%, or even 500%.
He rebrands the starvation. He never uses the word reduction when talking about their food. He calls them readjustments.
Readjustments.
Think about the modern corporate equivalents: right-sizing, synergy optimizations, strategic realignments. It is language designed to obscure violence and deprivation.
The tragic reality is that the workers find the problem insoluble. They have their empty stomachs on one hand, and they have Squealer's overwhelming lists of figures on the other.
Right. And because they do not have the education or the data access to refute the statistics, they are forced to accept the spreadsheet over their own bodily reality.
Language is no longer being used as a tool to communicate truth. It is being weaponized as a tool to exhaust, confuse, and ultimately pacify the populace.
And meanwhile, what is the leadership actually doing?
Right, what are they doing all day?
They produce nothing of physical value. They don't grow the food or build the infrastructure. But the PR department assures the workers that the leadership expends enormous, exhausting labors every single day upon mysterious, vital things called files, reports, minutes, and memoranda.
Sound familiar?
They cover large sheets of paper with writing, And as soon as the paper is full, it is thrown into the furnace to be burned.
It is the ultimate manifestation of bureaucracy. It is the creation of fake, impenetrable work to justify real, tangible power.
Exactly. By making the administrative processes sound incredibly complex and exhausting, the leadership insulates itself from the critique that they aren't actually contributing to the survival of the community.
But here's the friction point, right? Persuasion, shifting definitions, spreadsheets, gaslighting. They can only take a regime so far.
Yeah, they have limits.
Eventually, people will get hungry enough that the pain in their stomach overrides their belief in the spreadsheet. The shifting words on the wall will eventually lose their power to pacify a truly starving, desperate workforce.
Which is why every system of elite capture, if it intends to survive indefinitely, must eventually introduce something much more visceral than propaganda.
Force.
Right. To maintain absolute control, the new elite must establish a monopoly on violence, and they must create an eternal, invisible scapegoat.
The introduction of violence in this blueprint is a masterclass in patience and long-term strategic thinking. Up until a critical tipping point, the dominant faction, led by Napoleon, has ruled mostly through political maneuvering and Squealer's clever rhetoric.
But Napoleon has been playing a game that no one else even realized was happening.
Right. Months prior to this tipping point, 9 puppies were born on the farm. Napoleon immediately removed them from their mothers, claiming he would make himself personally responsible for their education.
He hid them away in a loft. Out of sight, out of mind. The rest of the populace entirely forgot about their existence.
He weaponized time. He understood that a true monopoly on violence cannot be built overnight. It requires a slow, hidden accumulation of force. He raised a private army in the shadows, while everyone else was busy debating agricultural policy.
And the reveal of this hidden force is timed perfectly. Napoleon and his primary political rival, Snowball, are engaged in a fierce public debate over the future direction of the enterprise, specifically the building of a windmill.
Right.
Snowball relies on logic, passion, and democratic persuasion. He delivers a brilliant speech, and it is clear to everyone that he has won the democratic vote. The system is about to go in his direction.
And that is the exact moment the democratic illusion is shattered.
Yes.
Napoleon doesn't argue back. He lets out a high-pitched whimper, and those 9 forgotten puppies, now massive, fierce dogs wearing brass-studded collars, come bounding into the public assembly.
They attack Snowball with lethal intent,
chasing him completely off the property. He barely escapes with his life.
The political landscape of the organization is permanently altered in a matter of seconds. The illusion of a flat hierarchy or a democratic process is instantly dissolved.
Overnight?
Napoleon immediately abolishes all public debates. He announces that from now on, all decisions will be made by a closed committee presided over by himself. There will be no more voting.
What I find so chilling is the tiny, almost throwaway visual detail provided right after this coup. When the enforcer dogs come back from chasing Snowball, they gather around Napoleon. And the text notes, almost casually, that it was noticed that they wagged their tails to him in the same way as the other dogs had been used to do to Mr. Jones.
That image is the visual confirmation of the transfer of absolute oppressive power.
The mechanism of violence hasn't been dismantled by the revolution.
No, it has simply changed hands. The new boss now has his own secret police.
Yeah.
He has officially established the monopoly on violence that defines a totalitarian state.
But physical violence alone is a crude tool, isn't it? If you just brutalize people, they will eventually revolt against the brutality.
You need a reason for the violence.
Exactly. What Napoleon does next with the aftermath of that violence is truly insidious. He turns the physical expulsion of his rival into an ongoing psychological weapon.
Snowball isn't just a defeated political opponent who has left the area.
No, Snowball is transformed into an invisible, omnipresent boogeyman.
This is the psychological utility of the scapegoat. Authoritarian systems, toxic corporate cultures, extreme political movements, they all require a perpetual external enemy to justify their demand for iron discipline and the suspension of normal rights.
Whenever anything goes wrong on the farm, the leadership blames it on Snowball.
Anything at all.
The windmill they spend a year building falls down in a storm. The leadership claims Snowball crept in at night and sabotaged it. A window gets broken. Snowball threw a rock. The drains are blocked. Snowball stuffed them with weeds.
Even when the workers lose the key to the store shed, the entire farm is convinced Snowball stole it and threw it down the well.
And the true power of this mass hysteria is revealed when the mislaid key is actually found under a sack of meal. The physical evidence proves Snowball didn't steal it. Yet the workers go right on believing that he did. The fear of the invisible enemy has completely overridden their capacity to process empirical evidence.
Have you ever noticed this dynamic in your own life?
Oh, constantly.
How often do you see a failing project at work or a disastrous policy rollout in government blamed entirely on an ousted executive, a previous administration, or a convenient external saboteur?
It is a deflection mechanism designed to protect the current leadership from any accountability.
The leadership must deflect that blame, because the reality of their management is that things are getting materially worse. The workers are hungry, exhausted, and impoverished.
Without an external enemy to blame for these systemic failures, the workers would inevitably look at the people making the decisions.
Exactly. Snowball becomes the necessary bottomless repository for all the regime's failures, just as Napoleon is manufactured into the singular source of all its successes.
It really feels like if Snowball had actually died in that dog attack, or if he had never existed in the first place, Napoleon would have had to invent him.
He absolutely would have. A system built on elite capture and deprivation starves to death without a scapegoat to feed the anger of the populace.
The need for the scapegoat is so absolute that it requires the complete rewriting of objective history. Squealer, the PR apparatus, begins to systematically dismantle the history of the revolution itself.
This historical revisionism is wild to witness. Think back to the foundational event of their freedom, the Battle of the Cowshed.
Right. Snowball was the indisputable hero of that battle. He planned the defense, he charged right at the human oppressors, he took a shotgun blast to the back, bled for the cause, and kept fighting. It was a matter of public record. Everyone saw it happen.
But a few years later, Squealer starts seeding a new narrative. He tells the workers that Snowball was actually in league with the oppressors from the very beginning.
Which is just a massive lie.
He claims Snowball was a secret agent, actively trying to get them defeated at the battle. He tells them that the shotgun wounds on Snowball's back were self-inflicted, just part of an elaborate act.
And when Boxer, the most loyal, hardest-working citizen, tries to push back against this because Boxer was there, he saw Snowball fighting bravely with his own eyes. Squealer smoothly shifts the narrative again.
He claims that Napoleon actually saved the day, springing forward at the last second with a heroic cry.
Squealer describes this fake alternate history so vividly with such graphic, emotional detail that the workers actually begin to think they remember it happening that way.
He uses emotional manipulation to overwrite their actual lived memories.
It effectively erases the rival's heroism and installs the current dictator as the savior of a battle he barely even participated in.
And with the past completely rewritten, with all present dissent crushed by the looming threat of the enforcer dogs, and the population totally confused by shifting language and manipulated statistics, the stage is set for the absolute lowest point in the blueprint of decay.
Yeah. The ultimate tragedy of this system doesn't happen to a rebel or a dissident. It happens to the most loyal, compliant citizen of all.
This brings us to the tragedy of blind faith, embodied by the character of Boxer. Boxer is perhaps the most heartbreaking archetype in modern political literature.
He represents the massive, powerful working class. He is an enormous, universally respected cart horse. He isn't terribly intellectual, but his physical strength and his moral steadiness are the literal backbone of the society's survival.
Whenever there's a problem, a setback, or a confusing policy change, Boxer refuses to engage in critical analysis. Instead, he adopts a personal maxim, "I will work harder."
Right.
He internalizes the systemic failures as his own personal responsibility to fix through sheer agonizing labor.
And as the leadership's corruption becomes more and more obvious to everyone else, he adopts a second, fatal maxim, Napoleon is always right.
He abdicates his moral and intellectual responsibility entirely to the state. He builds the massive windmill almost single-handedly. He strains himself pushing enormous boulders up the quarry hill day after day.
And he suffers a split hoof. It takes months to heal. His lungs are failing from the dust and exertion, but he refuses to take a single day off. He gives every ounce of his lifeblood, his actual physical substance, to the enterprise, hoping only to see the project well underway before he reaches the promised age for retirement.
But the promise of retirement in an elite capture system is always a mirage.
Boxer pushes his body past the breaking point, and eventually his lung finally gives out. He collapses in the quarry. He can't get up. He is no longer capable of producing labor.
And this is where the regime commits its most unforgivable, defining betrayal.
The leadership announces, with great faux sympathy, that they are making special arrangements for Boxer to be treated in a human hospital in the nearby town.
The workers are uneasy about sending him away, but they have been trained to trust the leadership's decisions. A closed van arrives in the middle of the day to take him away.
It is a gut-wrenching sequence.
Yep.
Benjamin, the cynical old donkey who represents the intellectual who sees the truth but refuses to act until it's too late, suddenly starts galloping and braying at the top of his lungs.
He forces the other workers to stop waving goodbye and actually look at the side of the van, taking their friend away.
Benjamin reads the lettering on the side of the van. Alfred Simmons, horse slaughterer, and glue boiler.
The leadership hasn't called a veterinarian. They have called the knacker.
They are selling their most loyal, hardest-working citizen to be slaughtered and boiled down for dog food and glue.
And what makes it truly demonic is what they do with the money.
They use the profit from selling his physical body to buy themselves a case of imported whiskey.
It is the ultimate transactional horror. Boxer gave his entire life to the state, and the state, without a second thought, monetized his death for a luxury good.
But what follows this event is equally disturbing. It speaks to the absolute depths of the psychological manipulation we've been tracking.
Right. 3 days later, Squealer, the PR man, comes out and announces that Boxer died peacefully in the hospital, receiving every expensive medical attention a horse could possibly have.
And he directly addresses the quote-unquote foolish and wicked rumor about the slaughterer's van.
Squealer claims that the van had simply been previously owned by the knacker and had been recently purchased by the veterinary surgeon who simply hadn't had the time to paint over the old name yet.
Just a tragic misunderstanding over a paint job.
Exactly. And he claims, with tears in his eyes, that he was sitting right at Boxer's bedside at the end, and that Boxer's dying words were praising Napoleon and the regime.
It is the regime's most audacious, easily disprovable, blatantly absurd lie yet. And yet the text explicitly notes that the animals were enormously relieved to hear this explanation. All their doubts vanished.
Why do they believe such an obvious lie? We have to dive into the psychology of cognitive dissonance here. They believe it because they have to believe it.
Exactly. To accept the actual truth that their beloved, heroic comrade was sold to a slaughterhouse by the leader they worship would require them to acknowledge that their entire lives, their entire society, is a horrific lie.
It would require them to face the fact that they are entirely disposable, that they are nothing but meat and labor to be consumed by the pigs.
The psychological devastation of that truth is simply too heavy a burden for the mind to bear. Facing it would demand a rebellion they no longer have the strength to fight.
So they actively choose the comforting lie. They participate in their own delusion as a desperate defense mechanism against absolute despair.
But this makes me want to push back and challenge Boxer's legacy as an archetype. Is Boxer a pure, tragic victim here? Or is his unwavering, unquestioning loyalty, that constant repetition of Napoleon is always right, is that actually just as dangerous to a free society as Napoleon's active greed?
That is a profound question, and I think the text suggests that Boxer is deeply complicit in his own oppression and the oppression of others.
Because think about it. Boxer had the physical mass and strength to crush those enforcer dogs at any moment. During one of the regime's purges, one of the dogs actually loses its mind and attacks Boxer by mistake.
Right, and what does Boxer do?
Boxer simply catches the dog midair, pins it to the ground with his massive hoof, and looks up at Napoleon to see whether he should crush it or let it go. Boxer's body holds the power to end the tyranny instantly, but his mind is completely voluntarily chained.
Boxer represents the well-meaning, hard-working citizen who abdicates their moral and intellectual responsibility to the state. By refusing to question the leadership, by replacing critical thought with repetitive slogans, Boxer becomes the engine of his own oppression.
His physical strength props up the regime, but his intellectual surrender guarantees its permanence.
Without the Boxer class willingly submitting and doing the heavy lifting, the Napoleon class cannot rule.
It is a chilling thought. The betrayal and consumption of Boxer is the point of no return for this society. The original utopian vision is completely dead, sold for parts, and drunk away as whiskey.
Which brings us to the final, terrifying culmination of this blueprint, the full circle of political decay.
Years pass. Generations turn over. The enterprise is ostensibly richer, the infrastructure is built, but none of the workers are richer. Only the management class and the enforcer class have benefited.
The workers can't even remember if things were better in the old days before the revolution.
And then the climax arrives, initiated by a terrifying neigh from Clover, the old mare.
She brings everyone rushing to the yard. And what they witness is a total paradigm shift. It is the final visual destruction of the boundary between the oppressor and the revolutionary.
Squealer comes strolling out into the yard, walking upright on his hind legs.
And then a long file of the management class follows him, all walking on two legs.
And finally, Napoleon emerges, walking upright and carrying a whip.
It is the ultimate nightmare image. The liberators have literally, physically become the exact thing they swore to destroy. The metamorphosis is complete.
But the final manipulation isn't just visual, is it? It is auditory.
For years, the sheep representing the unthinking, easily swayed masses have been used by the leadership to drown out any complex debate with their constant chanting of the foundational maxim.
4 legs good, 2 legs bad.
But Squealer had secretly taken them away for a week to teach them a new song. Just as the workers might gather the courage to protest this display of the pigs walking on 2 legs, the sheep burst out into a deafening, unified bleating.
And the chant is, 4 legs good, 2 legs better.
It is a brilliant, horrific perversion of the foundational idea. The chant that once signified solidarity and liberation is instantly inverted to celebrate emulation of the oppressor and absolute supremacy.
This leads to the ultimate distillation of corrupted language. Clover, realizing that everything is finally, entirely lost, asks Benjamin to read the 7 commandments on the barn wall one last time. She wants to see if there is any shred of the original law left.
But all the commandments have been erased. There's only one single rule left painted on the wall.
All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Let's just sit with that sentence for a second. We really need to unpack the sheer linguistic absurdity and the dark brilliance of this phrase.
It fundamentally destroys the very definition of the word equal.
It does.
It is the apex of doublethink. It is a sentence that asserts egalitarianism while simultaneously codifying absolute, inescapable hierarchy.
By appending the phrase more equal than others, the regime officially institutionalizes elite privilege under the guise of fairness.
It is the ultimate statement on how authoritarian regimes and toxic power structures of all kinds use the language of liberation to justify extreme oppression. It is a grammatical paradox that perfectly describes the reality of elite capture.
And it sets the stage for the final, chilling scene of the blueprint. A deputation of human leaders from the neighboring competing enterprises is invited to tour the facility.
That evening, the workers hear loud laughter and singing coming from the old headquarters. They creep up to the window and look inside.
And they see half a dozen of the human oppressors and half a dozen of the pig managers sitting around a long table, playing cards, drinking, and laughing together.
And Mr. Pilkington, a human leader from next door, stands up to propose a toast to their new friendship. His speech is crucial because it confirms the absolute structural equivalence of the new regime and the old.
He praises the new management for their up-to-date methods and their discipline.
And then he delivers the punchline that lays the entire system bare. He notes with admiration that the lower workers on this farm do more work and receive less food than any other workers in the entire county.
And he jokes, if you have your lower animals to contend with, we have our lower classes.
Lower animals and lower classes. It is out in the open. The revolution hasn't changed the structure of oppression at all. It merely swapped the occupants of the ruling class.
The new managers laugh at the joke. The old oppressors laugh at the joke. They are completely united in their shared role as exploiters.
And as the workers watch from outside in the cold, a violent argument breaks out over the card game inside. Both Napoleon and Pilkington have played an ace of spades simultaneously.
They're even cheating each other in exactly the same way.
Which leaves us with the final indelible image of the text. The creatures outside look from pig to man, and from man to pig, and from pig to man again, but already it is impossible to say which is which.
The cycle of political decay is absolutely complete. The revolution has eaten its own tail and become the tyrant it overthrew.
So as we synthesize this journey, let's think about the core path we've walked down today.
We started with a vision of total equality, a perfect, seductive dream of casting off the chains of the oppressor. But we've seen how that revolution is dismantled, piece by piece.
And it wasn't dismantled by an outside army invading the property. It was dismantled entirely by internal decay.
It begins with the vacuum of power, filled by a new managerial class.
It advances through the seemingly small hoarding of premium resources, justified by the pseudoscience of brain workers.
It progresses to the systematic destruction of objective truth, through the gradual, legalistic manipulation of language, shifting policies, and exhausting statistics.
It secures itself through the hidden architecture of violence and the creation of a perpetual, invisible scapegoat to demand blind loyalty.
And it culminates in the exploitation, betrayal, and literal consumption of the working class's blind faith.
It is a terrifyingly efficient blueprint. And it brings us back to where we started, looking at our own modern structures. The profound tragedy of this text isn't just that the new leaders became corrupt. Power tends to do that. It's a known variable.
The real tragedy is that the populace lost their ability to read the writing on the wall literally and figuratively until it was much too late.
The failure was a collective failure of memory, a surrender of critical thinking, and a fatal unwillingness to challenge authority when the very first small deviations from the truth occurred. Once the first commandment was altered without consequence, the fate of the entire society was sealed.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought for you to carry with you. We live in a world overflowing with information, with shifting terms of service, with political spin, and highly optimized corporate PR.
We are constantly being told what the reality of our situation is by the people who manage our systems.
So look closely at your own environments, your workplaces, your media diets, the organizations you give your time and loyalty to. Ask yourself, who holds the paintbrush in your world?
Who gets to write and rewrite the rules on the wall?
And more importantly, are you paying close enough attention to notice when they quietly add a few extra words to the rules you live by? Because the moment you stop paying attention, the new bosses are going to start looking exactly like the old bosses.